Good morning. I'm Brian Soublé, Chief Counsel here at the Department of Motor Vehicles, and as Bernard mentioned, I will be the today. I'd like to welcome you all to our workshop for the regulations being developed pursuant to California Vehicle Code Section 38750 for the non-testing operation of autonomous vehicles on public streets in California. A few weeks ago, we sent out an agenda for today's workshop, and we have, I believe, additional copies in the back of the room. If you haven't already picked one up, they are available back there. The workshop is also being recorded. We're not webcasting it this time, but that recording will later be available on our website. It is also being transcribed. So for the benefit of those who will be viewing this in the future, and for our court reporter, what we will ask is that when you wish to speak, you identify yourself with your full name and also what organization or company that you may be with. We have Bernard introduced himself and Stephanie. They are also our mic runners, and so when you wish to speak, you just kind of signal either Bernard or Stephanie, and they will bring a microphone over for you. This is a working session to develop language for our second set of regulations. As you can see from the outline that we put out, our objective today is to receive substantive input regarding the testing and certification of vehicle safety to facilitate the development of those post-testing regulations. We want to have participatory discussions on issues such as certifications by manufacturers that the autonomous vehicles can be operated safely on public streets by the public in general, and how the DMV will be able to determine the validity of those certifications in order to approve in a manufacturer's application for the post-testing deployment of autonomous vehicles. As Bernard mentioned, we appreciate your participation in our session this morning. The workshop will not be a substitute for participation in what we would consider our formal rulemaking proceeding. We want to spring from this session today with the text of a regulation, and that once we have that, we will of course publish it and do a 45-day public notice period. We'll have an additional hearing with respect to the text of that formal regulation, and you will all be provided the opportunity to provide both oral and written comments on that. If you had not already done so when you signed in this morning, that actually gets you on our notice list for the regulations. Many of you are already on it, but that will give you future mailings for anything that we do with respect to the development of the regulations. Our first item on the agenda this morning was introductions, and Bernard already took care of that. So the next item is general housekeeping. The restrooms are located outside of the hearing room. As we've mentioned in past, this is a secure building, so you want to restrict your access to the building, generally to this room and to the restrooms. There is no food or drink here in the assembly room. We're not going to necessarily break for a lunch today because we were hoping that we could, we don't necessarily want to break the flow of getting the information, and we also know that many of you have traveled from other places, and so taking a 1-hour break in the middle of it could, basically interrupt, and we wind up rushing at the end. So what we will do at a couple of times, we'll probably take like 15-minute breaks. We do need to give the reporter a break. And so we're just going to keep going through. We're scheduled today to go from 10 until 2. If we need extra time, those that are willing to stay, we will be available. Our discussion this morning is generally, we're just going to follow pretty strictly the outline, although we could have flexibility depending on how the discussion is going to maybe stray into additional areas. So with that, I think we're just going to go ahead and jump straight into the discussion, unless Bernard?
Yeah, some of you had asked about internet access within this room, and we do have Wi-Fi available. Our IT staff had made it available for a number of users, so if you do want some internet access for your laptops, go ahead and signal me. I'll come over and give you a password so you can go ahead and have that capability.
Okay, so going from our outline, the first subject that we wanted to discuss is autonomous vehicle safety certifications. One of our thought processes that is the way we understand it is once a manufacturer is ready to start deploying a vehicle, obviously they will have satisfied themselves that it is safe to do so. And throughout our discussions in the past, as we've been developing the regulations, we've heard comments about if you had a third-party certifier, what standards are you going to use that that certifier would be certifying to? And so part of the discussion we would like to open with is, gee, when you get ready to start deploying a vehicle, what standards have you used to satisfy yourself that the vehicle is now ready to be used by the general public out on the streets? And so I'd like to open it with receiving comments on that subject. If you'd like to speak, please just raise your hand and one of our mic runners will bring the microphone over to you. Yeah. Oh, come on now, you can't be shy. Okay, no one has any standards that they use before they get ready to deploy a vehicle to satisfy themselves that it is safe and ready to roll. Oh. Okay.
Hi, my name is Will Otero, and I'm with the Alliance of Automobile Manufacturers. We represent 12 automakers from across the globe. I think it's a little bit of a hard question for us to be able to answer because each OEM applies a variety of safety, functional safety analyses and processes to certify to themselves how the vehicle will function once it is deployed. But much of that, I believe OEMs would view that as proprietary as to how they certify that technology to their satisfaction. Obviously, all vehicles that are deployed in the marketplace, OEMs have to certify to Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards, and they do. But in addition to that, many of them have their own performance requirements, reliability requirements, and additional standards, international standards that they try to test to and certify to. But again, some of that gets into specifics on how each OEM would test their system because not all systems are the same. You know, a system that would be deployed on a highway would have different test characteristics than a system that would be deployed, let's say, for parking applications. Mm-hmm. So with that, I mean, our recommendation for your consideration would be there is a regime in place that automakers fundamentally understand. We think it works. It's based off of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. It is a self-certification system that, again, all OEMs commit to meeting the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard. And then in addition to that, there is the reality that no automaker wants to put anything in the marketplace that has the potential to do any damage both to the customers, to their brand, or to the motivating public. So I'll just leave it at that, and I'll provide additional input as necessary.
Thank you. You have to your name and affiliation.
Sorry about that. Barbara Wendling with the Volkswagen Group of America. I think Will Otero from the Alliance covered it pretty well. I think the only thing I would add is that, as he mentioned, that we do adhere to other voluntary standards, both industry and as well as the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards. But we also do our own internal testing, and we follow, the V model of product development, and those work out to be different for different applications. So even if, for example, Volkswagen has a traffic jam pilot application and Mercedes has the same thing, we might test them differently because we use different underlying sensor systems. So it's not simple to just say, okay, here's the conformance test, and everybody should do it the same way. That would require developing objective test procedures that can be, deployed the same for everybody, and those don't exist right now. Those are internal to each manufacturer.
But you understand that the problem that we face is that trying to be assured that the certifications that you give you, for example, in a self-certification regime, is actually adequate especially since we have to review it. What additional due diligence should we be doing that when you say it's safe, that's good enough? And so we constantly hear, well, how are you, if you use something other than that, how are you, DMV, going to come up with standards? And, our response now is, I hate to answer a question, but before you deploy it, obviously you put it through some standards and you've satisfied yourself that it is safe. So should we be looking at, I understand that each manufacturer is going to have something that is different, but can we come to some commonality that the department would be able to use to say, okay, we've satisfied ourselves that these certifications that they've given us are valid. Otherwise, it's just us basically taking your word for it. And should we as regulators put ourselves in the position that as far as we've gone is just taking your word for it? Any other input on that? Bernard, go ahead, please stand up and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Rosemary Shahan. I'm President of Consumers for Auto Reliability and Safety. We're a nonprofit auto safety consumer advocacy group based in Sacramento. And I really appreciate that the DMV is being deliberate about this process and asking really good questions, because as we've all learned over the past year, the testimony that was given last January, where Google and auto manufacturers testified and said, oh, not to worry, you can trust us, we can self-certify, and if there's a problem, our safety recall system is there as a backup to take care of everything, in painting a very rosy scenario about our auto safety recall system. In fact, nothing could be further from the truth. And as Congress noted in its hearing and has been covered in the news media, and as the U.S. Department of Justice has found and continues to find, auto manufacturers are concealing defects from the public deliberately. They're failing to report them. For instance, General Motors, Honda recently paid a $70 million fine and acknowledged that it had failed to report fatalities, injuries, over 1,700 fatalities and injuries to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration in violation of federal law. And other shoes are very likely to drop. Other manufacturers who have been involved with the Takata airbag recall. And those are, that's just the tip of a bigger iceberg. As members of Congress have been saying themselves, as editors of newspapers around the country, as the editors of automotive news have been saying, our current safety recall system is broken. There are serious problems with our safety recall system, and we need to take that into account as a state to protect our citizens. For instance, GM, even with all the publicity about the ignition switch recall, almost a year later, almost half of those vehicles still have not been repaired. Mary Barra testified before the U.S. Senate Commerce Subcommittee and told the senators that GM would appreciate it if they had better access to data so that they could contact subsequent purchasers of these vehicles. And it's, according to Carfax, there are 36 million cars on the road today that have unrepaired safety recalls pending. So this does not inspire confidence that the auto manufacturers who continue to be found not to be forthcoming, not to be complying with federal law, not to be reporting known safety defects to their federal regulators, let alone state regulators, that they're up to taking care of the public, especially as these cars get passed on over time. And this is a very real concern. There are also shortages of qualified auto mechanics. There are shortages of repair parts that delay repairs. Sometimes people go back and back and back to the dealer. They can't get the repair parts. The auto industry has failed to invest adequately in providing adequate auto repair parts so that consumers who are trying to get their cars recalled can get them recalled. We hear from consumers all the time. They're being told there are no parts available. We can't even schedule an appointment for you. And
Can I ask you a question? Because I hear your concerns, and that's part of, the reason why we're here today. And so, do you have some suggestions on how we can get, even in our regulatory process, information that would give us that satisfaction that the vehicles that are being introduced out there are safe, so that we can set, for lack of a better phrase, either some standards or give ourselves the comfort when we review an application that we've done everything that we can?
I think it would be wise for the DMV to go slow. Keep the numbers of cars extremely limited. Make sure that they're all identified so that if the public notices that there are problems, that the public can report those. And monitor their performance, especially if they're going to be used on our streets with other vehicles. And I understand that some of them already are being driven on our streets. I would not rely solely on the manufacturers or their suppliers to provide you the information you need. They're not even providing everything to NHTSA. Even with the authority that NHTSA has to find them, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, the Department of Transportation have repeatedly asked Congress for the authority to assess tougher fines in order to ensure compliance. Congress has failed to provide them with that authority. Congress has had lots of hearings. There's been, the issues have been aired. Congress has failed to do anything. They have not enacted a single piece of legislation. The current maximum fine that NHTSA can levy for egregious violations kill people and injure them is $35 million. They've asked for $300 million. They don't have that authority.
Yeah, and I understand. But the regime that we will have will not have those capacities, and so we're trying to figure out a way to front load. And so that was my question. Do you have some suggestions on what you believe we should do, so that when we design the application process, we're getting the type of information that you think is necessary to provide the assurances that the vehicles are safe?
Right.
I know it's a tough question, and we've
That's
been
right.
we've been tangling with it for almost 2 years now.
I know. How do we as a state monitor and exercise the proper authority? And I think the bottom line is there has to be some kind of redundancy built into the monitoring so that you're not relying solely on input from the manufacturers and their suppliers and all these self-interested entities, that keep saying they have public safety at heart. At the same time, their behavior indicates something very different.
Thank you. Is there anyone else would like to give input? Bernard, right here in front.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Abe Vergas, and I'm from a company called Alcohol Countermeasure Systems, based out of Toronto, Canada. And by the way, the state of California has some excellent roads here, and so I should commend the DMV for maintaining that. I think the scope of the discussion
It's
today,
our friends from Caltrans, so I'm gonna give Caltrans a shout out.
I say that only because I see the roads in Canada, and it's nothing compared to what I see here. The discussion should be pertaining to, totally towards autonomous vehicle safety. And my role as a regulatory affairs manager, I see different discussions with the vehicle manufacturers pertaining to EMC standards, pertaining to firmware hacking. Can somebody take over that? And I think, to answer your question directly, I don't think the state of California should take on the role of mandating standards against to what NHTSA should work with. And I only say that because the role of DMV would not just stop with mandating standards. Somebody will then have to enforce those standards. Somebody will have to sit and make sure that the non-compliance manufacturers are dealt with and recalls are happening specific to the manufacturers. It is outside the mandate of DMV to handle all that. NHTSA has that scope built in. They are the people that should take care of it. Having said that, DMV should also mandate what they require within the state of California. For example, the autonomous vehicle manufacturers said that recently, in the last week, that their vehicles don't work with snow. State of California, they don't see snow here, but the other states do. So, each state's DMV should put in their requirements and their mandates within to NHTSA and specify what they require. NHTSA is the organization mandated by Congress to take care of vehicle manufacturers. If DMV steps in, they need to put a lot of manpower and resources and dedication and time to go after vehicle manufacturers. It will be outside your scope.
Okay, thank you. You understand that the problem with each state coming up with different standards, it's difficult to manufacture a vehicle that would have different specifications and standards based on what would be happening in 50 states in the District of Columbia. So, yeah, I hear your point. And for us, the problem is that we're kind of in that between the rock and the hard place. We have a statute to implement that basically requires us 26 days ago to have a regulation in place that would allow the public deployment of autonomous vehicles. And so I think the difficulty for us is that the recognition that yes, NHTSA is the body that would provide standards, but we're already in a realm where we have to act. And so our task is trying to find the best way to do that. And what the statute requires is that a manufacturer submit an application with certain certifications on it. And really, if you boil it down into its essence, is how do we as a regulator satisfy ourselves that when they checked off that chart, we meet federal motor vehicle safety standards. We have the capacity for the vehicle to be either operated manually or make an emergency stop if there's a failure of the technology. We don't make inoperative any of the federally motor vehicle safety standards, other than just a technician just reading that and saying, yes, they've given us a paper. Should we have something that's farther, whether it's somebody else that looks at it, whether we specify some standards that they're necessarily certifying to? And I think that's our mission today, to try and figure out, is there something more than we can do than to rely on what is the existing system? So, go ahead.
Morning, my name is Susan Henderson. I'm from Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund. We're an advocacy group enforcing disability rights laws. What I want people to think about, and I don't have an answer for you how to do this, is that for people who currently can't hold licenses, people with visual impairments and people with other upper limb mobility, whatever it is, it's been held out that these cars will be a great advancement in their mobility. Somehow these safety standards have to, as they progress, include things that will not be barriers for people with disabilities to be able to take advantage of the technology. So I just wanted to have DMV think about that, and all the manufacturers in the room think about that too. Thanks.
I think all the manufacturers would agree with you. I think one of the promises of the technology is actually making vehicles available to people who have disabilities, and to being able to reintroduce the type of autonomy that we all have now, by being able to provide a mode of transportation that considers the disabilities that people have. So, I mean, that is one of the great promises of the technology, and I think any of the manufacturers in here would agree with you. That's a big part of their motivation for why they want to see this technology introduced. So, thank you. Further comments?
My name is Dan Reuter. I'm with Electric Movement. It seems that the most logical way to go about this, since you're looking at a room of equipment manufacturers that are making or desire to make a variety of different performance features into their equipment, that first you have to categorize what those performance features are, starting at basic operation like an automated valet to a stop and go automated freeway system, full autonomy, break those down into separate buckets, and then establish what is the acceptable performance criteria for those different buckets. Self-certification seems like the only really logical way to do this, since DMV doesn't have the technical expertise to actually evaluate from a systems level. So what you would do is evaluate the performance, as driving tests have already been discussed at the last meeting. But from a self-certification standpoint, you're asking the manufacturers to say, what capabilities does your equipment have? what capabilities does it not have, and then as, say, years go down, they might be able to update those, so add new features, update old features that have been improved. Say a vehicle can't operate in snow. Well, so you're saying on the application we can't operate in snow right now, but at some point in the future they probably will be able to operate in the snow. So it's, you know, it's a complicated problem because there are a lot of different goals out of this room of what they want to release to their customers. But starting with categories, that's the only way I can see how to do that.
So you'd see it more of like at the outset when you're in the application process, identifying what your vehicle, what its intended purpose is, what its abilities are, and somehow we would look at it and see that it meets or somehow performs as you're identifying it to us?
Well, you're doing two things. You're putting the manufacturer on the record saying, yes, we can do these things, rather than a blanket statement, yes, we are complying with FMVSS. You're saying, you're refining that to say, not only are we doing that, but we can do these additional features, which are not clearly specified by NHTSA or FMVSS. So yes, I mean essentially, but what you're doing is kind of putting everybody on the same playing field, where certain manufacturers only want to go after certain features, other manufacturers are more aggressive, they want to do more stuff. You're making a system that is uniform.
I see what you mean. So in the application, you would basically get authority to do just a specific thing that you applied for, and we would look to make sure that it can functionally do that.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to comment on that? Go ahead.
Hi, good morning. Chan Liu with the law firm Venable LLP in Washington, D.C., formerly Director of Policy and Government Affairs at NHTSA. Brian, having sat in your seat not too long ago, I definitely don't envy you the situation you're in. I'm definitely very sympathetic to the desire to find a way to essentially verify what the manufacturer are telling you. And the only word that I would offer is, I think you already know this very well. This concept of preemption is kind of looming out there. And what the situation you're in right now is you're required by state statute to move forward, but without the benefit of some sort of federal guidance or standards in place. I can assure you that the agency is definitely thinking about it. I was very involved in developing the agency's autonomous vehicle policy, and the way that the agency viewed that document is that it's organic. It will continue to evolve, and the agency, as it continues to monitor the developments in this space, will evolve its thinking and develop test procedures, figure out ways that they're going to be able to put in federal motor vehicle safety standards, to govern this space. The challenge there is, as we all know, the federal government isn't the most, rapidly moving entity, in the country. So, there's going to be some sort of lag time. And the challenge is that you don't want to create a situation where you're making requirements that will potentially be superseded at some point, preempted by the federal regulators. So that interim period can inject a significant amount of uncertainty for a lot of the companies who are trying, either the established OEMs or new entrants who want to play in this space. That uncertainty is not beneficial at all to development and trying to innovate in this space. So that's more a word of caution than anything else. In terms of actually, getting to the heart of what you're asking for, I think the previous speaker had very, very good points about these driving scenarios. If there are specific driving scenarios that OEMs, are attesting to, I don't think you necessarily need a third party to verify that. You just have them demonstrate, can they actually park on their own? Can they do this valet service? Can they navigate a road adhering to stop signs, stop lights? And if they can do that, much like we do with, a driver trying to take a licensing test, then that should be sufficient.
Okay. There are some resource limitations with respect to being able to do something like that, and so the issue with that would be is the additional cost to the department of introducing something like that. And so would that be something that you would recommend that we build into the application process? You're just not just paying a specific fee for us to have the people review the document, but somehow, since the state is going to have to somehow finance a system like that, is that a cost that should be shifted back to the manufacturers? After all, it is their technology that's being tested.
Right. Sitting from the cheap seats, who is not going to have to probably pay one of these fees, I would argue that that doesn't sound unreasonable at this point. You know, right now we definitely, I'm very, very, you know, sensitive to the revenue problem. When we were at NHTSA, anything that we tried to do, you know, we had to get funding for. So that's not an easy problem to solve. The user fee perspective is definitely one, you know, easy approach to go about it, and it impacts all those who are going to, you know, presumably benefit from this. So, you know, if maybe, yeah, you do it at the licensing level and it's part of your licensing fee, but you don't want to make it so exorbitant that you know, that small companies are priced out of that, and only, you know, large OEMs can pay these fees.
Thank you.
Chris Ermson with Google. So,
Go right ahead. No, just your microphone wasn't on for a second, so no, it's
sorry
on.
about that. Technology, it's confusing. So I just want to get back to your original question about how we think about safety and how we develop safe vehicles at Google. We kind of look at it as two avenues. One of them is thinking about what happens when things go wrong, when, you know, subcomponents in the system fail, when sensors fail to see things, when bits of software have defects in them. And the process we use to kind of dig into that is what's called a functional safety analysis. And there's a variety of different flavors of doing that, depending on kind of the domain that you're working in. You know, there's different options there, but there's kind of key elements to that you need to have in any viable functional safety process, and so we follow that internally. The second half of it is looking at kind of how the vehicle behaves when it's actually working. And so this is where what DMV has done with enabling on-road vehicle testing in California has been incredibly valuable. So our vehicles are out on the road every day, collecting data, operating in kind of the very naturalistic environment that you aren't able to replicate on a test track, right? The variability of scenes that you encounter is just so broad. We can then take that data, bring it back, and feed it into a test program where we can generate structured testing that will kind of vary the variables that allow us to really pick at where the problem cases are and then kind of iterate those. And then in conjunction with that, we have kind of the most devious of our people internally come up with what we call a red team on the vehicle and try and generate scenarios that we anticipate the software would have challenge encountering. And these may be situations that would happen, you know, once every million miles, once every 100 million miles kind of events, but it allows us to have confidence that the vehicle is going to be able to handle everything from the kind of the mundane driving that most of us hopefully experience driving here today to the very rare events, you know, like a woman in a wheelchair chasing a turkey in the middle of the road, right? These kind of things that you probably have never seen in your life, but the vehicle needs to be able to handle.
When you think about like the kind of the functional safety model, would you envision how do we incorporate that into the drafting of a regulation? Is there a requirement that you identify that you have a functional safety program, that you show us the functional safety program, that you document it for us, that you have the ability to continually test and follow up, and does that program include things like third people telling us this is how the car's performing now, and you know, how do we as regulators keep monitoring whether or not your functional safety program is sufficient? Any suggestions on that?
Hi, Brian Selesky with Google.
If you stand up for us, Brian, so everyone in the back can see you as well. Thank you.
Sure. So we don't believe that the DMV should mandate any particular functional safety standard. No one in the world has mandated 26262 or any other functional safety standard for the auto industry. Instead, we recommend that the department focus on requiring their manufacturers and their applications to operate on California public roads, that they self-certify that they've conducted a functional safety assessment. And we've debated this quite a bit internally, and you know, looking at this list can vary, right? But we thought about it very thoughtfully, of course, and we think, you know, a minimum subset there could be a hazard analysis and risk assessment. These are just standard things that are part of any of those kinds of processes. A statement of the safety goals, a brief system description. You could surface some of the safety requirements that you considered in the engineering of the system. response plan for how you intend to handle issues in the field. There's a number of other items that you could envision adding as part of your description of how you've self-certified to a functional safety process. Although some auto companies and suppliers are using 26262, the software portion of the standard is written is problematic. It's a little bit antiquated, and I know that we actually have a person on our team who's one of the, I think, 5-person group from the US working on the standard to improve that area. But something that everyone needs to appreciate and understand is that the standards development process is a long process, because you want to make sure that it isn't too restrictive. You want to make sure that you can still innovate, but that it has some teeth to it as well, right? And instead of mandating a specific process, you should instead be inquiring as to what process was used, and to understand a little bit more about how we've assessed the safety of our product, our vehicle, or whatever's under scrutiny. Just mandating any specific standard is too restrictive, and you may not actually get what you want out of it. Depending on how software intensive the approach is, depending on how much is done in hardware versus software, different standards will absolutely apply. And the standard alone is not enough to ensure that a safe product has been deployed.
What would be the additional thing that's necessary if the standard alone, or if the functional safety assurances alone aren't enough? What more would we need?
Well, I think this is a dangerous it's a dangerous route you're taking, right? Because these are very complex systems. The DMV is not in the best position to evaluate the safety of any one of these products, right? Safety is something that's built into the product from day one. It's something that is organic to what we do day in and day out as to how we engineer the product. Short of bringing you onto our team day in and day out to understand every line of code, every unit test, every V&V plan, I don't know how you can do that. I think that it's reasonable, makes sense to ensure that that the manufacturer has done due diligence, right? Which is why I was trying to focus, in the earlier points about these are some things that we could provide to you to show that we've taken safety seriously, that we've acknowledged best practices and those things that are part of safety standards that are out there. But I think it's a slippery slope where if you ask for too much, you're going to get inundated and not know what to make of all the data and all the things that we do over the course of a decade or longer to bring these things to market.
If we went to a system like that, should we, when you file an application, it's the staff that we have. We don't have automotive engineers that work in our occupational licensing branch, which is basically the branch that will accept the applications, that will review them for sufficiency and make the determination for us on whether or not we should grant the application to operate the vehicles. They're the same people that review an application for a person to be a car salesman or a school bus, operator, or a car dealership. And so I'm telling you, like, the limitations of what our people that have to review this are. So with a system like that, how would we know that once we got something, the certifications that we're getting, should we rely on someone else? Should we hire someone else? Should we recommend? Should we have manufacturers go out and get a certification from some other person that we can rely on, that our people who have the limited ability to look at that and say, yeah, that I'm satisfied with that? Should we be looked to, something more? I think that's our conundrum today.
Yeah, I think it gets back to this whole self-certification concept, right? I think, we'll tell you that we're doing these things. I don't think we're asking you to look through that volume of information and come to the conclusion, right? We are motivated, and that's why, we agree with the other statements about the power of self-certification. We think that we have a vested interest in making sure that the processes and the standards that we tell you we're following, that we've actually met that obligation.
Okay, so if we wouldn't go to a mode where we had another person that looked over it and said, okay, DMV, you can be satisfied, what are those elements that we should be receiving such that it gets us to the point that even with our limited ability to look back over what's submitted to us, that we can say, look, they gave us all of this type of information about the operation of the vehicle, and now we're okay with it, just with our capacity to be able to review. Go ahead, Rosemary.
Okay. Is it okay to
Yeah,
speak again?
it's, and just re-identify yourself because we're keeping a record.
Okay, Rosemary Shahan, President of Consumers for Auto Reliability and Safety. And I would suggest at a minimum a number of things, and as I mentioned before, having some redundancy, not relying solely upon representations made by self-interested parties who seem awfully eager to get into this space. Safety may not be their, I believe safety is not their leading concern. I think that that's pretty obvious. And I would say that, you know, as far as the weather restrictions, the reality is that sometimes we do have snow, and sometimes we do have very thick fog. And so we should look into it, and ask the entities that want to operate on our roads, ask them to make vehicles that are safe in the weather conditions that we actually experience in our state.
So do you think that when you know that a vehicle isn't capable to handling a specific weather condition, that when the manufacturer applies to us, it identifies those restrictions and then assures us that there's some mechanisms? Because you do have to realize that a consumer will buy the vehicle. And once it's out of that showroom, once it's away from the manufacturer, the consumer is going to do what the consumer wants to do with the vehicle. And so are you saying that the manufacturer in the manufacturing process should have some system to assure that the consumer can't make the car do something that's not safe?
Right, and of course one concern is that people move. Right? People buy cars in one state and move to another with different weather conditions. So even if we didn't have varying weather conditions in California, what are you going to do? Say to consumers, well, you can buy this car, but you can't operate it in any other state? Or you can't take this car to Lake Tahoe if it's going to snow? Or you can't drive it around San Francisco if it's foggy, or in Fresno with the Thule fog? What kind of restrictions are you going to put on the cars to ensure that they're operating in a way that, you know, they're safe from the get-go, especially if our streets are in essence their test track. And I just heard representatives from Google saying, you know, they put these cars out there and then they kind of monitor them and modify them, which tells me they're using our state roads as their test track.
Right, and we did, and I will tell you that last fall they in compliance with the first set of the regulations, the testing regulations, they have submitted and received an approved application. So they've told us they've identified the vehicles that are being tested. They've identified the drivers of the vehicles that are out there testing them. They've enrolled them in our pull notice program. They've sent them through a driver training program with respect to the operation of the vehicle. And that's common to all of the manufacturers. And I think, and Bernard, correct me, we're up to 8 now?
We actually have 7 manufacturers that are approved.
And
so there are 7 manufacturers that are testing their vehicles throughout our state at this point.
And we are holding them to standards that in operating their vehicles, they're doing it in the safest way possible. And so I think in the testing regulations right now, they are operating the vehicles on our streets pursuant to standards and pursuant to the approval of an application that we've given them. So
One other thing I would suggest, and that is requiring them to report problems directly to the DMV.
thank you.
And, you know, with their license hanging in the balance, perhaps, because their reporting to NHTSA can't be trusted. It's not adequate. And NHTSA keeps making clear they don't have the staff or the resources to do the job. They desperately need more staff and more resources, and the industry is blocking that in Congress.
Right.
They're
And
opposing that.
I hear your concern about the vehicles being able to move through different weather conditions, and we've heard a lot of discussions in the industry about how there's a phased-in approach and vehicles' capabilities, and I think that's why one of the assurances that we've been given, the certifications that we have to get from a manufacturer, while the statute speaks of a failure of the technology, we could take that one step further of the limitations of the technology, and having a system that is in place that would allow maybe a manual operation or no operation at all when the vehicle isn't capable of handling a specific condition. So I don't know if you have any further suggestions on that.
That sounds wise to me, because the last thing you want is fatalities and injuries involving these cars.
Thank you. Chen?
Chan Liu with Venable again. In response to the couple of points that Rosemary just made, I think there's definitely, when we talk about operational vehicles, there's got to be an aspect of personal responsibility, just like we have with regular cars today. There are recommendations on how properly to keep your tires pressured. The PSI on your tires inflated. There are safe, speed recommendations and limitations that we have in place at the state level, and yet people violate these. They don't keep their tires inflated. That's a safety issue. People go well above, the speed limit. That's a safety issue. So there is personal responsibility in place. If the manufacturer of this technology says it does not operate in these scenarios, and you take it into these scenarios, that's a personal responsibility. That I don't necessarily think that you should limit that capability from operating. That's a decision that the owner is consciously making. So I think what you suggested at the very end was there are certain limitations that the manufacturers are outlining. These are scenarios in which it will not operate. I think that that would make sense, because it puts everybody on notice that there are scenarios where it's not perfect right now. It's continuing to evolve, and there are limitations, and so the operators and the owners should know what they are.
And in your earlier comment, you mentioned almost what I would describe as a DMV road test of a vehicle, having it identified what the capabilities or what the vehicle is designed to do. As part of that type of a scenario, would we be then attempting to make it do things that it shouldn't be allowed to do, and assuring ourselves, and with the extra step, it won't do something?
You mean putting it in stress scenarios?
Right.
Well, I think if with a driver having taken a driver's test, they're putting those scenarios all the time. Just taking the driving test on the public road, there's all sorts of variability and scenarios that you can't account for. Just happen, and so you need to see how those drivers respond. And I would posit that you would want to see how the vehicle responds in just everyday driving scenarios.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, John Doherty. I'm Vice President of State Policy and Politics for TechNet. We were one of the co-sponsors of SB 1298. So, on behalf of my association, I want to thank the department for today's workshop and all the work you've been putting forward on this. We are hoping that the department will continue to kind of move with deliberate speed in a way that honors the promise and intent of 1298, which is to promote and allow these cutting-edge technologies. And we think that a lot has been said today about where are the DMV's strengths and shortcomings on these issues, and I think all of it seems to be coming around something that we would encourage, is that the regulations end up being performance-based. I think that there is a temptation to get overly technical in terms of exactly how those standards are reached. But when you think about what the DMV traditionally does, and it has always done, is make sure that how the vehicles are operated by a safe system. And I think that costs are things that we have to kind of deal with as they come up. But as long as you can keep it to the DMV making sure that the vehicles perform as advertised, and you keep those regulations flexible so that they can adapt to existing and improving technologies, we think that's the best way to go. So appreciate it.
Thank you. we've been kind of free flowing on the outline so far this morning, and I haven't necessarily stuck to the items as they're listed on the outline because we seem to be discussing them all at one time. So I'm going to keep following up on that mode. And one of the things that really is of a major concern to us is DMV's. What will DMV do to verify the manufacturer's compliance with safety standards? We know there's federal regulations and vehicles have to comply with federal motor vehicle safety standards. But once we submit that, once we approve an application and vehicles start getting deployed, we have somewhat put the state's stamp of approval on there. Yes, you can start introducing these vehicles out on the street. And that's why a lot of our concern is, should we, just receive an application and then rely on the information that's submitted in the application, or whether we can somehow look to some other body to either, whether it's they review the application or they do something other, some other additional testing that would assure us that the vehicle is ready and it can be deployed out there and purchased by ultimate consumers. And so I'd like to move some of our discussion to that. What should we, DMV, be doing once we get that application? Should we look to someone else? And are there people out there with the capability? I think a lot of you know we did an RFI back in the fall and received information. I think we attached some of that information to it. And is that a viable mechanism for us? Can we use someone that would be able to get information from the companies and then, looking at the information we receive, give us some assurances that yes, they are going to perform like the manufacturers have suggested? Any input on that? Oh, I know you guys got ideas out there. Come on.
Address that question to start it off. It's Abe Burgess with ACS. If the Department of Motor Vehicles does not have the resources to do the testing themselves, if it's the same personnel doing the approvals of driver's licenses and everything else, I certainly believe that they got to rely on third-party testing. You certainly cannot believe on self-assessments, just like the lady behind me mentioned, because self-assessments is not a practical way to move forward. But there are agencies out there that actually look at every possible scenario. For example, NASA believes, when they did the moon landing, when they did the landing in Mars, they thought of every other possibility. There are going to be pitfalls as we move along. And I think some of the liability should be should transfer on to the manufacturer so that they're very aware of what the responsibilities are for them if something does not proceed the way they think it should. So third-party assessments, definitely the way to go. You have to start building on one, and they have to be independent, completely independent of any other manufacturers out there, so that you can really rely on their data to move forward.
Should they be bodies that we dictate? For example, we say, hey, there's these 4 or 5 companies, you need to use one of them? Or should the flexibility be for the manufacturer to, hey, we're ready to roll, but we're going to give you the assurances from this third party, this independent third party that we retained to review our program?
The third-party assessment will have a number of different, test regimens in there. There will be, radio frequency assessments. There will be the electrical testing part of it. There will be the mechanical part of it. I don't think the manufacturers can certainly have an input in terms of what needs to be tested, but again, it should be independent. DMV does not probably have the practical knowledge to mandate what's out there, and that's why workshops such as these will certainly add to that knowledge base. But DMV will have to come up with a standard practice protocol so that can be mandated with this third-party assessment, independent of the manufacturers and possibly independent from DMV.
What would you envision that would be in a standard practice protocol?
Again, multifaceted. You'll have to make sure that you've got EMC requirements called out. From the safety perspective, you want to have road hazards, you want to have electrical hazards, everything addressed. It's over and above what we see today. It's nothing like we would, and again, it's the wave of the future. Nissan has promised that they'll come out with their first vehicle in 2020. And to address the lady who mentioned about every state will have their own regulations for autonomous vehicles. The state of Michigan is proceeding along as well. The state of Nevada is moving along as well. So every state is going to have their own regulations for these. I think the state of California is the front runner, and that's hats off to that. So, but I think it'll be multifaceted. You want to have different protocols built in. I think workshops like this will certainly develop some of those standards.
When you think about that type of a review, the one thing that I always question is how much time would it ask, and you know, what additional cost would it add to the development process?
You know, we're always in a 2020 situation where we'll always look back and say that, you know, we should have captured that scenario. I think Google will certainly have a lot of answers. They're a great, an excellent resource to come out and tell us what risks to look for. But, you know, in time, we never have enough time. We're always behind the 8 ball and always trying to get out the latest standard out there. We just set a deadline and move forward with it.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Annie Leon. I'm an independent expert. My position on third party is that you should not rely on third party. These systems, I forget who it is, these systems are complex. The engineers themselves who are working on these systems, I think they are the ones who know these systems better than anyone. They are the ones that can judge that the systems are ready or not. And there are a lot of internal checks and balances in automakers, such as product liability. The lawyers are there to watch out that any systems that are being sold are actually not going to cause any product liability problems. There are separate safety departments for safety regulations that are also watching out. So I think you have good checks and balances, internal checks and balances from automakers in order to make sure that self-certification is actually done correctly and thoroughly. And third parties, if you introduce third parties, I think it's just introducing an extra bureaucracy that actually would help and would hinder the innovation and the development. Remember, this technology is still infant. It's not solved. It's gone a long way. It's very advanced, but it's not solved. And if you introduce third parties, for example, I read your agenda, and some of the third parties mentioned that it would be 6 to 9 months to certify just one system. Well, in 6 to 9 months, the engineers would have come up with something that's going to be a lot more innovative that might have made that system even safer. So why would you then try to sell a system that took 6 to 9 months to certify by a third party when there might be actually a new version that the automakers should instead sell? Because it's safer, because there's no new innovation since the last 6 to 9 months. So that's something to keep in mind.
I hear what you're saying, but then again, that raises concerns for me, because if what you're saying is that, look, in 6 to 9 months, they would have figured out something that's even safer, what about me that bought the car 6 to 9 months ago? You know, how am I going to get it? Is it a system? You know, are you envisioning a system where updates are sent to my car, or my car is brought back and it's now updated for the new, better, safer systems that are being out there? I would hate to make an investment of, I don't know, $25,000 to $40,000 in something, and it's like my iPhone. It's obsolete next year when we hold a big splashy convention at the Moscone Center and say, now you got to run out to your local whatever dealership and buy the new updated version.
So the 6 to 9 months I was talking about is just simply to get it certified, and then it takes some time before it's actually sold. Okay. So for example, the automaker could, the entire time throughout the entire process of the development, the automaker is making sure that it's safely developed. And it could be that at some point the automaker decides we have a new version, we have to make sure we now continue the development with this new version before we actually release it. So that's what I meant by, if you have a third party take 6 to 9 months certifying a specific system, the automaker, if you let the automakers self-certify, their self-certification process is throughout the whole process of the development, not just after, okay, this version's done, now we're going to self-certify.
But I point out that third party is looking at what you manufacturer is saying is now ready to roll. I'm submitting an application and I've got a car. It's now ready to roll. I want to put it in dealerships and I want people to be able to buy it. And so when you say that 6 to 9 months for them to review it, they're reviewing something that you've now come to the department and said, I'm ready to start letting people operate it.
Now, I think the thing to keep in mind is they're reviewing something that's frozen. Whereas if car manufacturers are able to self-certify, the certification process is throughout the whole development process. It's not just at one point during a frozen moment. That's the difference.
Well, isn't that the same problem with if a manufacturer comes to us and says, okay, now here's the car, you guys get in it and drive it, these things, it's frozen, it's at a point in time. Isn't that the same problem? Isn't that why we wouldn't have a system like Janet mentioned, that you take the cars out and they bring them in and you test drive them, so to speak, of their capacities? If I hear what you're saying, that a third party looking at it at any particular period of time, it's frozen, isn't that the same thing as if we were taking the cars out and test driving them?
If you the DMV, did
Right.
it. If you the DMV were to take out a car and test drive it,
Right.
it would have been a version. It would have been the latest version that we would have kept. The automakers would have made sure that we had the newest version the whole time during the development. And so therefore, when you're looking at it, how long would you take? You have a couple weeks, a month to test drive if you like.
I don't know. It was just a suggestion that was made here
Right.
this morning.
So that's the difference, is you would have a shorter period of time where you would test it. And that is probably the most recent version that you're testing, versus, let's say you take 9 months. In 9 months' time, it might be that we would say to you, you should test drive this new version we have.
But see, I think we're saying the same thing, but what I'm saying is that when that manufacturer comes to us and we're at the same day, either we're test driving it or we're having a third party take a look at it. Now, whether it takes us a 20-minute ride or we get the car and we get to put it through its paces for a week, that's the same point in time that third party would be looking at it. And what I hear, what you're saying is that the third parties are saying it would take them 6 to 9 months to be able to look at it. But we're talking about the same car that is being brought to us, where we would be putting it through some testing regime, as opposed to it's that same vehicle that third party would be looking at. And so I'm trying to understand why one thing that we've discussed this morning would be okay, but don't have a third party do that, because the vehicle will get better. It makes me more nervous now to say, that idea of DMV being the test driver, that's somehow not as good, is better than someone who has experience in looking at it, making that assurance. And see, that's why I'm kind of lost in what your concern is.
My concern is the long lag time and the extra bureaucracy that might be unnecessary. If you look at it for a month, the consumer can then buy it or operate. Maybe it's who knows if it's just simply a consumer who wants to test it out. And it would be sooner that the consumer can then test and drive and operate the latest version that works the best. And if there is a new version, let's say 6 months, then maybe, I don't know, maybe the process is the consumer then is required to go back and get the update. They can go back to the company and get the update. But the difference is the consumer's not getting a 9-month-old system.
Well, then this may be a rhetorical question then. If people who are experienced in and have vastly greater experience than the DMV in reviewing the safety of systems and making sure that things comply, say it would take 6 to 9 months, doesn't that beg the question that if we only took a week to do it, we have somehow missed something?
I think the answer, again, relies on the fact that automakers have years of experience and they have a lot of incentives to self-certify correctly, thoroughly, and safely.
I hear you, but I'm still worried. Because what I heard before was maybe you guys can come up with a system where you guys would take it out and push it against its limits. And then what my question was, is there somebody else that we can introduce to do that? And you're saying, well, the people, for example, the R5s we got say it would take 6 to 9 months. It kind of makes me worried that we would be doing something in maybe a couple of days that people who have expertise say takes 6 to 9 months. I mean, is that something that I should be worried about? Go ahead, Chris.
Chris Ernst with Google. I think part of the challenge is that we're conflating two different activities by the DMV or by a third party. One of them is the assessment, certification, what have you, of the process that's used to develop the artifact, the vehicle, the technology. And the other is an evaluation of kind of the driving performance of the vehicle in an environment. And I think that the challenge with the first is that without being embedded with the process very early on, you can't kind of dig into the intricacies of all of the functional safety analysis, all the failure modes, all the mitigations that have been implemented to address those failure modes. And so that's where this kind of, I guess we think it's very hard for a third party to come in and kind of dig into the meat of that functional safety analysis. On the kind of operational part of the vehicle and testing it and making sure that it drives like a human driver, I think the DMV is actually fairly uniquely qualified to do that, right? That's one of the major roles of the DMV, is to certify drivers for operation on the road. And operating, running a driver's test on the vehicle, I think is actually quite an interesting idea.
Dan Reuter, Electric Movement. I think a relevant example that already exists is the CARB standard, the Air Resources Board standard. There are certainly, in that standard, you have to comply with certain rules, certain amounts of CO2 per mile, certain amounts of smog-causing emissions per mile. And you can certainly have that testing done by a third party if you want to, but you can also do it internally. It's the same process. You have to test the same number of things. You have to fill out the same paperwork. You have to do, the process is the same whether it's done by a third party or internally. And particularly relevant to that is who's going to test these things. There is no testing body that exists that can do this work right now. If I wanted to go have a vehicle tested right now, I couldn't do it. And also in that vein, say you were going to enact the standard, and therefore certain testing bodies that already exist are going to try to add this expertise. Where are they going to get these people? They don't exist. They're already working on other projects. So they're not going to be able to go out and find people that don't exist. They're not going to be able to train people to be experts in this area. And furthermore, any testing body, you're going to want to be able to catch whether, I mean, it seems that a fundamental, there's a fundamental lack of trust among industry, between some people in this room and industry. And if you don't trust that the industry, that the manufacturer is going to do their due diligence, then the testing body needs to be able to catch errors or mistakes or willful negligence. How are they going to do that if they don't have more expertise than the manufacturers themselves? So I guess I'm talking about more of a practical problem than anything else. Like, there is literally no way to do this, as far as I can tell. But if you can create the testing procedures that would satisfy you, and let the manufacturers do it themselves, and then you let the industry evolve a little bit, maybe some of the testing companies will introduce the capability to do that, and then maybe that would make you more confident in the results. But honestly, if it were me, if it's a car I'm buying from some manufacturer X, I would be a lot more comfortable that they've tested it to their standards than some unknowledgeable testing body.
Thank you. Annie?
Yes, and to add to that, I ditto everything he says, and to add to it, this is just a new way of looking at it. This could also help in terms of fees and everything, and your budgetary restraints in the DMV. If the manufacturers self-certify and they pay our licensing, then they are putting on record they've self-certified thoroughly and safely. Then why not also have the consumers be a part of the whole process too? The consumers, if they want to trust that the manufacturer car that they're buying is a car that's been self-certified thoroughly and safely, and they want to use it and they want to operate and buy it and whatnot, why not have the consumer also be a part of this process, and they also pay a license as well, and they're also putting on record, I trust the car, the autonomous driving or automated driving system I'm buying right now has been self-certified correctly according to what I think would be safe, and I want to operate it and sell it. It's just another way of looking at it as well, right? Now you have not only the manufacturer saying self-certified, it's something you can trust, you can also have the consumers be a part of the process who say, I also trust, I want it, I'll buy it. I'll pay a license fee for it too.
So is that something that the consumer would have to do before they were allowed to purchase the car? Or would they have to somehow come to us and get an endorsement on a license that says, okay, I'm going to buy an autonomous car, and by getting this endorsement, I thereby agree to feel satisfied with the safety of the vehicle?
I think it's more, yeah, exactly, it's the second. It's more it's more a second way of making sure that you as a DMV has done everything you've done in your hands to allow operation of autonomous vehicles or to automate systems on the roads. And you've done everything you can to make sure that it's safe, meaning it's not only self-certified. Okay, we didn't really want to trust self-certified 100%. Now we have the consumer saying they also trust it, so they also put on record they agree they can operate this. And that also gives an extra bonus that they also would then be forced to agree to the limitations of the system as well. If it doesn't work in snow, driver, consumer has to agree, I understand it doesn't work in snow. I won't operate it in snow.
Okay. I guess, and I can't necessarily speak on behalf of manufacturers, but I think they'd be worried about a body of people out there who would find a way to sue them for it anyway. Just because the consumer says, I'm satisfied that and I'll abide by those assurances if something goes wrong, how does that insulate the manufacturer, and will that acknowledgement be meaningful when they get hit with a multi-million-dollar lawsuit? Go ahead. Go right ahead.
Hey, Brian, this is Will Otero with the Alliance of Automobile Manufacturers. So there have been a variety of concepts that were discussed here, and so on, I think third-party certification, I would echo some of the concerns that were raised earlier. I think from an automaker perspective, and I think Chris raised this earlier, to put our systems to a third party where we would have to provide insight into the IP and the architecture of those systems, I think, and the proprietary information on how these systems were designed, I think gives us some pause and will give the individual automakers some pause. But also, I mean, there was a comment that was raised earlier about the delay in this and potential third-party certifications. All of the ideas that have been discussed today, I think, to echo Chan's comments, I feel for you because it is a difficult challenge that you have. They all require resources. They all require some level of expertise that perhaps is outside of what you guys normally do every day. It is the automakers. We talked about the responsibility of automakers and potential lawsuits and everything, and that is a reality for every vehicle that we put on the road, and that is it goes into making sure as an incentive that they have gone through their process. I mean, we discussed earlier potentially a certifying of a functional safety standard. I think we don't want to get specific on that, but that all automakers have some sort of process in place. What those categories would look like, I'm not exactly sure. That's something I'd have to take back and get additional information from the OEMs to kind of think about. But it just seems to me, listening to the discussion today, that the complexities of moving forward lend itself to using the system that's in place by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and allowing them to do their work, their continued work in the research, and obviously their continued effort to regulate these systems. Just for your consideration. It's not what you want. It doesn't get you everything you need. But I think given the complexities we've heard so far, I think it's probably the best path forward.
Thank you.
Rosemary Shahan, President of Consumers for Auto Reliability and Safety. And if I could respond to some of the comments and to your question, you were asking, I believe, whether it was good to have an independent third party evaluate the safety of the vehicles and their safe operation on the road, or an entity that is funded and chosen by the manufacturer. And I would say definitely you want them to be independent. And regarding whether there are independent testing agencies, of course there are. For instance, there's the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, which does its own testing and publicizes the test results regarding crash tests. And they have tremendous expertise, their own testing facility. They actually work with the manufacturers very closely on doing their testing. And time and again, we've seen cases where vehicles do not perform well in the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety crash test. They work with the manufacturer will do a redesign and improve the vehicle, and then they get the coveted 5-star rating. And so there's that. Consumer Reports also is extremely independent, has its own testing track, I believe in Connecticut, does a lot of vehicle testing and evaluation. There are others with considerable expertise that I think the DMV should at least take a look at and consider. But I think that it's not accurate to say that there aren't independent testing entities out there. Whether it's feasible for the DMV, whether they would donate testing, or I know that there are budget constraints, so I understand you have to grapple with that.
Sure.
But as far as shifting the liability onto the consumer, speaking as a consumer advocate, I think that's really fraught with peril. You're basically saying, take the person who's least able to assess the safety of this car and shift the liability onto them. And as the representative from the Auto Alliance said, the possibility of liability is actually something that creates an incentive to build safer cars. We don't want to lose that. And thanks.
Thank you. Right up here, Stephanie.
Hi. Eric Williams, just want to make a quick comment.
Eric, who you're with?
I'm counsel for the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety.
Thank you.
So just wanted to add a little comment. Typically, we don't test any sort of technology safety standards until that technology reaches the market. We've just recently started with the autonomous emergency braking, but that's the full extent that we've done for any sort of crash avoidance technology. We don't really have the resources or the expertise to tackle autonomous vehicles before they even hit the market. Even if we have the opportunity, I think it's unlikely that Google is just going to give us a bunch of cars to test for the next few months, or Nissan or GM. So it's not something that we really have the capability. Once these start hitting the road, once consumers start purchasing them, that's probably when we'll get into the game. But,
Thank you.
yeah.
I think I saw Brian had his hand up.
Brian Selesky, Google. So just responding to some of the comments that were just made. So I think you have to understand that by the time this technology gets to market, myself and my colleagues, we will have been working on this stuff for well over 20 years, each of us. And I think, and there's roots to what we have on the road today to 20 years ago and what we've discovered along that way. By the time it will have come to market, millions of miles will have been sort of parsed and understood, and all of the subtleties that happen during those millions of miles of driving will have been factored into the approach and the algorithms that are being developed. And just don't underestimate the complexity of what is inherent in these systems to make them safe. Mm-hmm. They're not complex just for needlessly. It's to achieve a safe product. They are inherently complex, and to think that a third party will come in and in even a 6-month analysis sit down with us at the tail end of that process and be able to come up with a definitive conclusion for the DMV, I think is naive. I have been through in years past from military robotics, just me personally, nothing to do with Google, make sure that's clear. Just me personally, I've been through a number of military programs with robotics. And they have their equivalent safety standard 882D, and a number of other standards that are kind of specific to depending on what you're building. There's no third-party review, but what there is a demonstration at the end of the day that you've done due diligence. And so, for example, there's Aberdeen Proving Grounds, which is the U.S. Army's one of their centers of excellence for testing. And what they will do is they will receive what may have been built over the course of many decades, and they will run through a series of demonstrations to ensure that, which is no different than the driving test that I think has been proposed. They have a process. You may be able to look to some insight there. But again, there is no third party that comes in to ensure that those systems are good to go. There's certainly oversight, but that's a whole separate topic of how the military brings those things together. But my point is, just don't underestimate the complexity of these systems and how many years it takes to bring this stuff to market. And I just think I think a third party would be disadvantaged to try to come in and sit through those millions of miles of experience that we've accumulated over several decades of experience to be able to come up with a firm conclusion.
I'm going to make one statement in response, and then we'll take a short break. But, when we mentioned the drive test, the one thing that concerns me about it is, yes, we are very good at testing people for driver's licenses, and a large part of the population that gets a driver's license from us are between the ages of 16 and 18. And I think our insurance people out there will tell you that they are probably the most dangerous people on the road. And so, if we start getting some comfort level in that, hey, you tested it just as you test people for driver's licenses. Remember, we're only testing to a minimal standard. And yes, they are minimally safe to get a license and get out there on the road. And the insurance statistics show you that those people with the least experience are the most dangerous on the road. And so I worry about instituting a regime that it's, again, us saying, okay, yeah, this is ready to go. But again, we're only holding it to a certain amount of us putting it through its paces. How do we know that it is indeed now safe for everyone under all conditions? So with that, we're gonna take about a 10-minute break. It's 11:25, and so we'll start back up promptly at 11:35.